So our group did the global climate crisis, and what this is the global climate crisis is a challenge that affects us all. As climate change accelerates, we are seeing increasingly severe weather events, intense hurricanes, scorching heat waves, and unpredictable floods, all of which disrupt communities and lives across the globe. In this presentation, we will be talking about the potential shutdown of the AMOC. We will also be discussing how melting permafrost is not just a distant concern, but a looming reality, as well as expanding deserts, worsening weather conditions, and climate change. These issues are intertwined, impacting everything from our homes and health to our economies and ecosystems. So, what is climate change? Climate change refers to the long term alterations in temperature, precipitation patterns, and other atmospheric conditions on Earth. These changes can naturally occur, but the current trend is largely driven by human activities. So, what are the specific problems? The first one is rising temperatures. This is when the global temperatures are increasing due to the buildup of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. This can lead to more frequent and intense heat waves affecting health and productivity. Sea level rise is another big problem. As ice melts and seawater expands due to warming, the sea levels rise, which can lead to coastal erosion, flooding, and the displacement of communities along the coasts. Ocean acidification is another problem, and this is with increased CO2 levels lead to higher concentrations of carbonic acid in oceans, harming marine life, particularly shellfish and coral reefs. And the final problem I will be discussing is extreme weather events. Climate change is linked to more frequent and severe weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, and heavy rainfall, causing widespread damage and disruption. So, how bad is it? Climate change is a severe and widespread issue that affects virtually every part of the globe. Its impacts are already being felt and are projected to worsen if trends continue. So, for the global temperature rise, average global temperatures have already risen by approximately 1.2 degrees Celsius since the 19th century. This is primarily due to human activities. This warming is accelerating and has widespread impacts. For the sea level rise, polar ice caps, glaciers, and sea ice are melting at an accelerated rate, and the resulting sea level rise threatens coastal communities and ecosystems. Sea levels have risen 20 centimeters, or approximately 8 inches since 1900, with the rate of increase speeding up. Extreme weather events. The frequency and intensity of these extreme weather events, such as hurricanes, heat waves, droughts, heavy rainfall, have all increased. These events cause significant damage to infrastructure, ecosystems, and human lives. And for ocean acidification, oceans have absorbed about 30% of the CO2 emitted by human activities, leading to ocean acidification. This affects marine life, particularly organisms with calcium carbonate shells or skeletons, such as corals and shellfish. So, what are the consequences? So, for heat-related illnesses are a big one. And this is when increased temperatures and more frequent heat waves can lead to heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and other heat-related illnesses, particularly affecting vulnerable populations such as the elderly, children, and those with pre-existing health conditions. It also impacts mental health. The stress of dealing with climate-related disasters, uncertainty about the future, and the impact on livelihoods can contribute to anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. Additionally, the trauma from experiencing extreme weather events can have long-lasting psychological effects. For the sea level rise, the melting ice caps and glaciers, along with the thermal expansion of seawater, contribute to the rising sea levels. This can and will lead to coastal erosion, flooding of coastal areas, and loss of habitats like wetlands and mangroves. It will also affect water and food security. Climate change can impact the availability and quality of water resources and disrupt food production. This can lead to malnutrition, foodborne illnesses, and other health-related issues related to inadequate access to clean water and nutritious foods. So, what are the human causes? Human activities are the primary drive of recent climate change, largely due to the release of greenhouse gases and other pollutants into the atmosphere. So the biggest one is the burning of fossil fuels. This includes coal, oil, and natural gas. These are the primary sources of energy for electricity, generation, transportation, and industrial processes. Burning these fuels releases large amounts of CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Deforestation is another um, big cause, and this is causing the land use to change. So, cutting down forests for agricultural, logging, and development reduces the number of trees that can absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere. And for the agricultural expansion, clearing the forest for crop cultivation and livestock grazing contributes to the deforestation and habitat loss. And finally, population growth is a really big cause in this. It's increasing the demand. So, a growing global population leads to increased demand for resources, energy, and land, which can drive higher greenhouse gas emissions and environmental degradation.
So my subsection is worsening weather disasters. Some specific problems are torrential rains, severe flooding, droughts, wildfires, and deadly heat waves. Hurricane Fiona dumped unexpected and unprecedented levels of rain, which caused catastrophic damage to Puerto Rico, which left its residents without electricity or drinking water. As a result of flooding, the average global sea level has increased 8 inches in the last 150 years. In the way of droughts, the American West is currently in the midst of a mega drought that ranks among the worst in the past 1,200 years, even despite the heavy rainfall that we had in 2023. And much of that region is currently facing extreme or exceptional drought conditions. And I know we've all heard about the wildfires in California. In 2020, the California wildfires burned more than 4 million acres. And California's single most destructive and deadliest wildfire in history destroyed an average of 1 football field worth of land every 3 seconds and unfortunately killed 68 people. Heat waves are another big issue for Californians, especially in Death Valley this past July, where thermostats reached the hottest temperature ever recorded and hovered around 130 degrees. And that same month, the average global temperature also hit an all-time high. So some consequences are declining mental health. These severe weather instances cause fear, anxiety, and terror in a lot of people. The loss of houses, personal items, friends, family, pets, and other things can lead to depression and other serious mental health concerns. Being trapped inside due to wildfires, the smoke from them, rain, flooding, hurricanes, even heat can also wreak havoc on a person's mental health. Declining physical health comes from breathing in the smoke from those wildfires or being in the heat for too long in that much direct sunlight, which can cause cancer. People drown in the rain, leading to injuries and death. The injuries and death just that come from weather in general are heightened and worse when it's an example of an extreme weather condition, such as hurricanes, people getting hit by debris, and other instances like that. The human cause, which I'm sure we're all aware of, is fossil fuels. And that's when greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are trapping heat, which leads to warm water, causing shifts in weather. The more that greenhouse gases increase, the frequency and intensity of the extreme weather events is also going to increase.
My name is Emma, and I did the AMOC, also known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation Shutdown Possibility. Okay. The AMOC is a system of ocean currents that moves water in the Atlantic Ocean. It transports warm water north and cold water south. It is a conveyor belt that mixes the world's oceans, distributes heat and energy, and contributes to the climate. The AMOC is driven by differences in temperature and in salt content, which makes the water denser. The more water flows, the more the cold and dense it becomes, causing the water to sink and flow south. And then the warm water will rise closer to the surface, which is called upwelling, and will flow north. Scientists are concerned that the AMOC is slowing down, and research suggests that the AMOC could completely collapse between 2025 and 2095, as it has been becoming weaker in the past 1,000 years. And then the diagram below is just an example of how the warm water and cold water is flowing. If the AMOC shutdown does happen, it could cause catastrophic climate change. The projected impacts would be nearly impossible to adapt or recover from. With a change in precipitation, scientists are not sure that agriculture could prepare for this event, let alone survive it. We would most likely not be able to reverse the effects a shutdown would have. And a lot of the northern hemisphere could be covered in snow or the climate would become colder. So that's what this picture is. So some of the consequences include temperature changes, weather changes, sea level rise, and disrupt the climate globally. So the northern hemisphere would get colder and the southern hemisphere would get warmer. Europe would be drastically affected and would cool between 9 and 18 degrees Fahrenheit within 100 years of the shutdown. Warming coastal oceans would contribute to extreme heat waves and fuel more intense storms along the North Atlantic track. And melting ice caps and increased precipitation would cause the sea level to rise. Specifically, it would accelerate around North America. This would cause many coastal cities to start to be encompassed by water, which would also cause people to have to move out of these cities as they would no longer be safe to live in. And overall, a collapse would disrupt the climate globally, and it would shift the Asian monsoon rainfall patterns. Um, Human causes. The AMOC is vulnerable to climate change caused by fossil fuels, and the AMOC weakens as greenhouse gases increase and the atmosphere warms. The more the atmosphere warms, the more the ocean surface retains more heat and becomes fresher due to the increased rainfall and the melting icebergs. This weakens the ocean's ability to lose heat, therefore weakening the AMOC. It is the primary reason why the northern hemisphere is warmer than the southern hemisphere by 1.4 degrees. Well, that would be the primary reason. That would be caused if the AMOC shuts down. Things humans do that greatly increase the amount of carbon's emissions released into the atmosphere include electricity, which is about 25% of our carbon emissions, transportation, which is about 28%, agriculture, which is about 10%, and more than that, which like the residential and commercial and industry. And then these are my references.
Melting permafrost. Permafrost is terrain that has been frozen for at least 2 years and consists of soil, rocks, and sediments, amalgamated into a whole by ice. Permafrost is covered by a layer of earth on the surface and ranges in depth. It requires low temperatures for its formation, so permafrost is mostly found in the Earth's northern hemisphere. The emission of greenhouse gases, which is a major contributor to climate change, warms the Earth's surface and triggers heat waves, and these rising temperatures cause the melting of permafrost. Since most of today's permafrost was formed during the Ice Age, it contains a large accumulation of carbon dioxide and methane, double the amount that is in the atmosphere. Thus, the thawing of permafrost and the release of these gases poses a major threat to the environment. Greenhouse gases cause permafrost to melt, which emits more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in an endless cycle. The melting of permafrost has reached a critical level. If the globe were to increase in temperature by 1 degree Celsius, nearly 4 million kilometers squared of permafrost would be lost, which is roughly equivalent to the size of India. And if the globe were to increase in temperature by 2 degrees Celsius, 40% of the planet's permafrost would be lost. If emissions continue unchecked in the coming decades, the world's area of permafrost will decrease rapidly. Thawing permafrost has the potential to turn into a muddy, unstable slurry that cannot support the weight of the soil above it, triggering damage to roads, buildings, and pipes, as well as creating sinkholes and landslides, downing trees, and slumping telephone poles. Muddy landscapes cause the destruction of local plants, which starves the wildlife that consume those flora. Due to infrastructure damage and erosion, communities, especially in western and southern Alaska, have been forced to move from their land, which negatively impacts their mental health and well-being. When the ground thaws, frozen plant material within the earth will begin to thaw and decompose, releasing methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Harmful microbes and bacteria, including the deadly pathogens responsible for anthrax and smallpox, could be released into the atmosphere and fertilize ecosystems, unleashing major disease outbreaks and epidemics. The melting of permafrost also contributes to the desertification and drought of tundra ecosystems. Permafrost temperatures are heavily impacted by human activities that warm the planet, such as industrialization, urban development, agriculture, and the burning of fossil fuels, as well as the pollution that all of these cause, due to their ability to produce greenhouse gases and damage the ecosystem. And here are my sources.
My name is Helen Paglio, and I am presenting the topic of desertification. In 1994, recognizing the significant impact of desertification, the UN established the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, or the UNCCD. Desertification is when fertile land deteriorates due to human environmental impact and overall climate change. In 1994, the UNCCD defined desertification as land degradation in arid, semi-arid, and dry subhumid areas resulting from various factors, including climatic variations and human activities. While this definition doesn't mean that deserts are literally expanding, it does mean that there is an overall loss of healthy, fertile, and life-sustaining land. Climate change, combined with factors like overexploitation of resources and land mismanagement, has led to an acceleration of land degradation. For example, the Green Revolution of the 1950s and 1960s and industrialization of agriculture has saved over 1 billion people from famine. However, it has led to unsustainable farming practices that destabilize the complex ecosystems around the world. Deforestation, reduced vegetation cover, the lowering of the water table, increased salinization of soils, and increased use of pesticides all exacerbate the self-perpetuating cycle of desertification. Water is used at a rate beyond its replacement. Then the land fails to adequately sustain life, and then, as the land becomes less and less productive, more land is exploited to create more and more areas for industrialized agriculture. Here are just a few of the consequences of global desertification. Land becomes unusable for crops and livestock, and thus increases food insecurity. The water becomes inaccessible for large populations in regions of desertification. Populations must then move to areas that are more hospitable. These populations are chronically malnourished and vulnerable to disease. Increased particulates in the atmosphere because of growing frequency and severity of dust storms lead to further illness and respiratory damage. Additionally, ecosystems lose the ability to provide important ecosystem services like carbon sequestration. We need every carbon sink available to combat climate change and to stop this feedback loop from continuing the process of desertification. So how bad is it? Well, healthy land is disappearing at a rate of 100 million hectares annually. That is equivalent to 4 football fields every second. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN reports that this degradation affects 3.2 billion people worldwide, particularly impacting rural communities and smallholder farmers who depend on the land for their livelihoods, leading to increased hunger, poverty, unemployment, and forced migration. In addition, currently 1 million known animals and plants face extinction. According to biodiversity reports by the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, by 2050, land degradation and climate change combined could cut crop yields by 10%. Pollution, over-extraction, and other factors mean that 4/5 of the world's population lives in areas where water security is threatened. Here are my references. Also, World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought is annually on 17 June. This presentation has given an overview of a few of the prominent issues we face regarding our climate. We have just scratched the surface of the problems and recognize that the global climate crisis is a complex and nuanced issue. It can feel overwhelming in its scope, but as Dr. Jane Goodall said, what you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. For further information about how we can address the global climate crisis, please visit the UN's website outlining their 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your time.